I was just floating there in this place of nothing, complete silence, and feeling very, very light, and no time. The whole time concept completely disappeared. And the feeling was amazing. It was calming. I wasn't afraid. There wasn't any fear. Just a calm, amazing feeling. And as the time went by, there wasn't any time, but as it went by, I was like, there's no other words to really describing it, but everyone speaks with themselves. Everybody has their thoughts. And you say to yourself, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, but you say it in your thoughts. So on the same level of communication, I was like telling to myself in my thoughts, so-called, what's going on? Like, where am I? What's going on? You know, it's very weird. Like, it wasn't familiar. And in the same type of communication, like as if a voice is answering to me, you're dead. This is your death. And I'm like, what? What do you mean this is my death? And it's telling me, you're dead. Alon is dead. And it's kind of like pointing down for me to see something. And I look down, like as if I'm looking down, and I see my body on the girl. And I don't feel like any connection so much to the body. It's like as if I'm seeing something from far away. And a question that I get a lot is, what do you mean a voice was talking to you? So it wasn't a voice. It's very hard to describe it, but the same level of communication that you think with yourself, you have a thought, there's a language in your thought. If you're American, you think in English. If you're Israeli, you think in Hebrew. Same thing with dreams. In a dream, there's a type of a communication, but there's no voices in a dream. There's nobody talking to you in a dream. There's just some type of a very intellectual level of communication. So the same thing, that voice that I call the voice was communicating with me. And the same thing that in a dream, you kind of see things in a way that is familiar for you, but it's a different reality. So when I was saying it was kind of like pointing down, it wasn't a hand pointing down. It was more of a knowledge telling me, look down.
My awareness was expanding more and more, like going through different levels, because after a while, I started to leave this physical level. And when we leave our physical body, we leave behind everything that's associated with our body, our biology, our voice, our race, our religion. All of that gets left behind. And what crosses over is just pure essence, pure spirit, or pure love. We can call it whatever we want. And so I started to encounter the essence or the spirit of other people who were familiar to me, like my dad, who had died 10 years ago. I felt his presence around me. And even though he wasn't in his physical body, I recognized him immediately. It was literally like his energy and my energy just merged. And I was like, oh, Dad, it's you. I just knew. And we're not even talking to each other. We don't need to explain who we are. We know what each other is feeling right away without words.
I felt feelings that I had never felt even as a child, as a newborn with my mother. I felt cherished in a deeper way than I knew you could experience. I felt like everything was right and all right, and that nothing mattered except being in the present of this experience and in this feeling. And all of this information that came in this moment of being there, when you cross over, you're privy to all of the universal information. You might not retain it when you come back, but you are there in it in that moment. You are connected to all there is and all that is. And I was so grateful to be there. And as I got closer to the front of this group of men, the one on the left stepped forward and he started to speak to me. And when I say speak, it wasn't articulation. It was as if we were speaking inside of each other. And there was no effort to it. It was just communication. It was just normal communication.
And I got to ask all my big whys. I got to ask all of the things that I had ever wondered about. And those were the top 3 things that struck me that I had spent a lot of time thinking about. And in my justification for not believing in God. and what happened is all of my thoughts just went out telepathically. And the answers, the perfect answers, came back. It wasn't the way, like we talk, it was like the entire answer and all of its ramifications instantly came into my head. And the only thing I remember, I don't remember the details, this was specifics of the answers, but I knew that I had known these things before. And I thought, oh, of course, how could I ever have forgotten? And so what happened is, after a while, I ran out of questions because I got it. I got the whole picture, the perfect knowledge that is present in the mind of God or everywhere, and I understood it.
Now, the next thing I knew, I was sitting above my body. It was the most incredible experience that anyone could experience, watching yourself on the table, laid out, and watching the doctor operate on me and continue to do the operation. I was standing above my body, and there was someone else sitting by me. It was a person that I could never look at, but I knew they were there. And when they would talk through their mind, and I would talk back to them through my mind.
And I must tell you, we didn't talk with words. I only had to have the germ of what I was going to say, and he received it immediately. Didn't even have to think out the individual words. And the first thing I said to him was, I know what has happened. I understand. I know that I have died. And he said, again, without words, he transmitted to me mentally, I guess, that's correct. Yes, yes. But you will not be staying here because it isn't time for you to be here yet.
Before me was the light, and instantaneously, and I want to emphasize instantaneously, the light emanated to me in a telepathic way. And, let me first say and get out of the way that, very bluntly, the light is God. But as I first perceived it, I just perceived that the light emanated to me and made me understand that some most profound things, such as, and I'll role play again to describe the dialogue of sorts that I've kind of translated. For instance, the light emanated to me, Tom, you have to be where you are and in the condition that you are, and before you is the light, which is redundant because I was already experiencing that. You have an opportunity, Tom, to perceive or desire or ask any question, any series of questions, and regardless of what the question is or how intensive the knowledge is necessary to even understand a proper questioning, that as soon as you formulate the desire for such a question, that the absolute, unequivocal, correct answer will be emanated instantly back to you. Now, what I'm describing is a phrase that I've coined, which is very accurate, and it's superluminal telepathic communication, in that it's a telepathic type of rapport, just thought pattern to thought pattern, that functions at or faster than the speed of light. Little loose ends tied together, and this was not just logical deductive reasoning. This is something that I was shown and told as part of the experience. In other words, if you're so inclined to understand anything at all about clairvoyance, it would be a telepathic, clairvoyant type rapport that is extremely pure or functioning at such a speed that is outside the realm of this physical existence and outside time. If you function at the speed of light, you cease to function in what we know as in time. So your perceptions would be at the speed of light, and any kind of dialogue would be not held by the bonds of timelessness or timeliness, and that if you ask something, you can be given the answer simultaneously.
I was 9 years old, and my dog, Skippy, was there. My dog was there. And again, remember, I didn't know I was dead. And he didn't have fur and legs and stuff, but it was Skippy. He was also a floating sphere of awareness. And he absorbed him. We absorbed each other, and we were communicating. There was communication going on, but it was perfect communication. It was like telepathic, and in human communication, there's this thing that happens all the time. I know you know about this, like where you'll say something and I will hear something completely different based on my filters, right? So human communication is flawed, but that communication there was perfect. And Skippy and I were talking to each other. It was, I love you, oh Skippy, I love you, where are we, what happened, how did we get, it was kind of going on and on like that. And
it wasn't verbal. It was all just through thought. And it was really, since I wrote the book, sometimes I think back on this and I think it wasn't really even thought. It was almost like taking a whole concept and giving it to them through the power of intention.
And I asked the man that was with me, and when I say I asked, you don't talk like you're speaking, like I'm talking to you right now. You speak in a way of what I believe that we call telepathy. You know what the other person is saying, and you converse that way.
And the same question again, what have you done with your life? Now over there in that realm, there is no such thing as hypocrisy, because one of the first things that you become aware of is that the other being is totally aware of what you think, so you can't think one thing and say another. There's no such thing as misunderstanding what he meant. And yet, here was a being that knew everything about me, and he totally accepted me and he totally loved me. Now that blew my mind.
I could see only their outline, because some light was filtering through them. It was kind of they were translucent kind of figures. I couldn't see any faces or anything. I had few questions in my mind at the time. And then I more like I was communicating with somebody who at an upper intellect, higher intellect level, or at super level, whoever it was communicating with me, all that communication was taking place telepathically. Whenever the thoughts were coming in my mind, questions were coming in my mind, and before the question would be completed, an answer would pop up in my mind automatically.
I don't even know how to explain it. That's the problem. There are no human words to explain to you what it's like, but I'm going to do my best. I was being communicated to, not with words, but with waves of emotional, energetic energy that had, I sensed the power. First of all, the love was unconditional. I cannot stress that enough.
And then there was a stairway that was near the glass sea, which it looked like a sea, and a stairway that went up, and a large angel with the most power, if we would say that. And it was clear that he was basically in charge of that stairway, And just began to communicate to this angel heart to heart. Again, it's hard to say, did we talk? It seemed like it, but then it seemed like we didn't. This communication was just impeccably pure.
I realized there was an awareness there, so I thought to ask it a question, to speak to it. And as the question came into my mind, I already knew the answer. And there wasn't even a need for telepathy, because I already knew everything that I ever wanted to know. It was just a matter of focusing on it. And as I wanted to know something, not only what I wanted to know came through, but the fully abridged version of it, with references to how that one little piece of the answer was fitted into the rest of creation. Every part of reality fit perfectly together. I felt connected to everything.
The only thing I heard was the people saying, "Ray's here." There was a swan off in the distance who didn't speak to me in a normal vocal sense, but it was more in a way of telepathy. The swan actually asked me, "Where have you been? We haven't seen you for such a long time."
This being, this light, was just, it had everything in it that was good and positive, and the light was absent of all negativity and sickness. It was the very existence itself. And I realized as I was experiencing this that this was also my higher self and everyone else's higher self. And I expanded into the joy of being one with everyone else in their higher self. So there was the light and my higher self and everyone else's higher self, which was the one self, and there was this tremendous joy. And then there was this higher way of thinking and higher way of being. And then I had a conversation with the light, and it's not like in verbal, it's telepathic. And I felt myself in a timeless state. I could have been there 2,000 years, 1,000 years. There was no sense of time. But it was having this conversation about love and humanity and the secrets of the universe and our higher self and how to be in higher consciousness and being. And as he was sharing this, I still felt the finality of it all, and yet of not being in my physical body anymore. I had a light body, and I was so at home.
I remember just being, I knew I was dead, and I was like, and then he stuck his hand out for me. And, here I am not really believing in God and anything, and then he sticks his hand out for me. And anyway, I was like, no, please, don't take me. But I could hear him talking to me and through his mind, not like he wasn't speaking, but I could hear him. And the light that came around him too was, it was beautiful inside there. It was really like a soft white light, it wasn't bright to hurt your eyes or anything like that, but it was similar to the light that came out of his face, like when his face broke up and he was just light.
And I could see my friends that had brought me to the emergency room, as well as see the doctors and nurses that were working on me in the ER. I remember being out of pain. I was wishing I could communicate to the medical team that this is okay. You do not need to save this girl. I was happy. I was in peace. I was in knowingness. And I was wishing I could communicate with them, but I knew what was written on their hearts. I knew what they were thinking. I knew how much they wanted to save this 19-year-old girl. And I was shot through with compassion for the medical team, wanting to accomplish this task. And with that, I was re-entered into my body, and the nurse said, I have a pulse, I have a pressure. And what I want to share briefly is that you need to understand that even though you believe someone is dead, that they can still hear you, they still know what's written on your heart, and that's important to remember.
While these memories do have a sequence, They also transcend linear time, and they're all kind of happening all at once right now. They're more like they're alive, they're real now, not just in the past, even though they do feel extremely ancient at the same time. So it's difficult to put an identifier on that. But I remember long ago, before I had ever been physical, coming across a being who had been physical. This being was so beautiful and overflowing with joy and power. And I felt that from him because in those environments, you share what you feel, and who you are is shared with those around you. And it's telepathic exchange that's quite perfect. And so I asked him, my goodness, do you feel the depths of joy that I feel that you feel? And he shared it with me and kind of let me go into it and feel it and dive into it. And I was absolutely amazed. I only know the quality of the nature of the being because everything, okay. So when we interact with each other on that side, it's very personal and exposed and true and colorful. And so the nature of the being that you're interacting with is known and felt by you.
As this being didn't have a face, I never looked at that. I was too immersed in the energy it was producing, and it was communicating with me almost in a telepathic sense. But you, when you think about a big stadium, a big auditorium, and in this auditorium it's a hot day and you're inside and all the lights are out, and someone opens the door and steps into it, you see their silhouette and the light floods in around them, and that's what you see.
And she had this long blue gown on, I guess it was like a sapphire blue gown on, and she had this white headscarf over her head down, it was quite long, went past her hips, and she had her hands here between her breasts in a prayer position, and she had always kept her head bowed like that, and she had long, straight, glossy black hair down to her waist. And she spoke to me telepathically. She never moved her lips once.
So they greeted me, and we communicated, although not in English, not with our mouths. It was a form of communication that made me truly understand how God can speak to people of different languages, and everyone understands them in their own language. And so we traveled down this path, and we didn't walk with our feet. We just moved, and we just traveled. And we traveled into an area where there was a giant field of sorts that again was beautiful, but it was all colors, and the sense of beauty was very intense.
And the presence, as it filled the room, started to comfort me in telepathy. And basically it was, if you want to let go, it will be okay. There was definitely a sense of there would be a transition. It wasn't a sense of an instantaneous feeling. The presence continued to grow and get stronger and more loving, to the point in my mind, my heart, my soul, my being felt very safe and comforted. That sense that I would be lifted and alive. And when that fully permeated my sense of Jessica, but also feeling secure in this love, in telepathy, I said, yes.
And at that moment, this white light came to me and stood before me about 3 feet away. And it's interesting, I had a tradition, in a Christian tradition. Cynthia had no tradition. Jesus doesn't appear to me as a personage, but it's a ball of white light. In other words, it's not Buddha or Muhammad, it's just a ball of white light. And yet I made an appeal to the Lord. Lord, where am I? The light comes to me, embraces me, and then I start to calm down a little bit and realize I'm safe. I'm safe here, safe as I've ever been. And as that happens, I begin to realize, and I say to the light, but what about Dale? He's going to wreck. So there I am, kind of on the grounds of heaven, with the opportunity to ask the light. And my first question is, what about Dale? He's going to wreck. And as I spoke, it was, at the time I felt as though I was speaking directly to the white light, to the Lord. Yet, it was as though it was telepathic, really. I spoke the words, and they were received and spoken back to me.
At that moment, I no longer had any awareness of any of my senses. I didn't have a body. I didn't see anything. I could picture the earth in my mind, but I didn't see the earth. I didn't see blackness. That's seeing something. I saw nothing. There was no sight. There was no touch. There was no taste. There was no smell. There was no feel. Didn't have any of those senses at all. And yet, my brain was functioning, my mind was functioning. That which occupies my brain was functioning. And certainly you could still think in English, although English became quite irrelevant at that point because it didn't describe anything of what was going on. And of course, foremost on your mind is that all of your senses have just been cut off. Well, not quite all of your senses. Your sixth sense is still working very well. I say still working because your sixth sense is working while you're here. It's one of the things that you choose to ignore to be here. You choose to because it makes the experience of being here have more depth, more intensity, if you will. It takes on a more realistic look to it. If your psychic sense is working, if you're still picking up on what everyone else is thinking, including yourself, and what goes on outside this planet, you're not as focused on the book. So people have often asked me, how do you become psychic? And I just have to laugh. No, you don't become psychic. You are psychic. You forget that you're psychic. You let go of your senses here, and your sixth sense is still right there, and you have got it at all times. And it is not something that you do. It's that you stop doing this. So people look to try to figure things out psychically, and they think there's some effort you have to make. No, you stop making an effort. It's the exact opposite of what you would expect. You stop thinking about focusing here. You stop thinking about your sensory input here. You stop thinking about a whole frame of reference of being here. Meditation is wonderful for this. It centers you, if you will, in source. You let go. Basically, people, when they tell you to meditate, they'll say, you just sit in one place, close your eyes, try and just ignore all sensory input and say, I am. Excellent. That is source. Very definitely. And don't be too terribly disappointed if you find that you cannot turn on the psychic charms and become the world's renowned psychic overnight, because you lose a lot of depth of what's going on here if you choose to do that.
Everything is standing right out in the open. And it's just a question of how you look at it. So you do discover, when you realize this, the most extraordinary thing to me that I never cease to be flabbergasted at whenever it happens to me. Some people will use a symbolism of the relationship of God to the universe, wherein God is, say, brilliant light, only somehow veiled, hiding underneath all these forms that you see as you look around you. So far, so good. But the truth is funnier than that. It is that you are looking right at the brilliant light now, that the experience you are having, which you call ordinary everyday consciousness, pretending you're not it, that experience is exactly the same thing as it. There's no difference at all. And when you find that out, you laugh yourself silly. That's the great discovery. In other words, when you really start to see things, and you look at an old paper cup, and you go into the nature of what it is to see, what vision is, or what smell is, or what touch is, you realize that that vision of the paper cup is the brilliant light of the cosmos. Nothing could be brighter. 10,000 suns couldn't be brighter. Only they're hidden in the sense that all the points of the infinite light are so tiny when you see them in the cup. They don't blow your eyes out. But it is actually, see, the source of all light is in the eye. If there were no eyes in this world, the sun would not be light. You evoke light out of the universe. You, by being this organism, call into being the whole universe of light and color and hardness and heaviness and everything, you see? But in the mythology that we've sold ourselves on during the end of the 19th century, when people discovered how big the universe was, and that we live on a little planet in a solar system on the edge of a galaxy, which is a minor galaxy, everybody thought, we're really unimportant after all. God isn't there and doesn't love us, and nature doesn't give a damn. And we put ourselves down, you see? But actually, it's this little funny microbe, tiny thing, crawling on this little planet that's way out somewhere, who has the ingenuity, by nature of this magnificent organic structure, to evoke the whole universe out of what would otherwise be mere quanta. There's jazz going on. But you see, this little ingenious organism is not merely some stranger in this. This little organism on this little planet is what the whole show is growing there, and so realizing its own presence. Well, now here's the problem. If this is the state of affairs, which is so, and if the consciousness state you're in at this moment is the same thing as what we might call the divine state, if you do anything to make it different, it shows you don't understand that it's so. So the moment you start practicing yoga, or praying, or meditating, or indulging in some sort of spiritual cultivation, you are getting in your own way. The moment you see you hypothesize that you are different from the universe, you want to get one up on it. But if you try to get one up on the universe, and you're in competition with it, it means you don't understand you are it. You think there's a real difference between self and other. But self, what you call yourself and what you call other, are mutually necessary to each other, like back and front. They're really one. But just as a magnet polarizes itself in north and south, but it's all one magnet, so experience polarizes itself as self and other, but it's all one.